The calendar hanging askew on the wall of the bombed-out cafe read March 1945, but calendars had lost their meaning in Munich. Time was no longer measured in days or weeks, but in the terrifying intervals between air raid sirens. The city, once the proud, beating heart of the National Socialist movement, was now a graveyard of jagged concrete and twisted steel. The grand boulevards were reduced to goat paths, winding through mountains of rubble. The air didn't just smell of winter. It tasted of pulverized brick, unburied bodies, and the sulfurous residue of 1,000 fires. It was a city holding its breath, waiting for the final blow. Jack Galloway, an operative for the clandestine branch of the OSS, sat at a corner table that was covered in a layer of fine gray dust. He nursed a cup of ersatz coffee, a vile brew made from roasted acorns and chicory that tasted like burnt earth. To the weary waiter wiping tables with a filthy rag, and to the few terrified civilians huddled in their coats, Galloway was Hauptmann Stefan Rice. His papers, currently resting against his chest in the inner pocket of his tunic, identified him as a decorated officer of the 11th Panzer Division, on medical leave after taking shrapnel in the shoulder near the Hungarian border. The disguise was impeccable. The Wehrmacht uniform was authentic, stripped from a corpse in a ditch outside Stuttgart 3 days ago. It was stained with real mud and smelled of stale tobacco and fear, the perfume of the dying Reich. The Iron Cross First Class pinned to his chest was genuine. Even the bandages wrapped around his left hand were clean, concealing not a wound, but a small, tubular, lethal device strapped to the inside of his wrist, a Welrod Mk2 silenced pistol. Galloway wasn't here to sabotage a bridge or assassinate a general. Those were missions for the loud, for the desperate. He was here for something far more dangerous. He was here for the future. Allied intelligence had confirmed a rumor that had been haunting the command posts in London and Washington, deep beneath the SS administrative complex on Prinzregentenstrasse, in a reinforced bunker that had survived every bombing run. The Nazi High Command was orchestrating Operation Werewolf. This wasn't just a plan for guerrilla warfare. It was a blueprint for a post-war terror network. It contained locations of buried weapon caches, the frequencies of sleeper cells, and the identities of thousands of fanatics who would melt into the civilian population to poison the peace for decades to come. Galloway's mission was a suicide run. Infiltrate the bunker. Photograph the werewolf dossiers. Get out. He checked his watch. The glass face was cracked, but the mechanism still ticked. 21:15. The sun had long set, plunging Munich into a blackout so total it felt like being at the bottom of the ocean. Galloway finished the bitter coffee. He placed a handful of wrinkled Reichsmarks on the table, money that was becoming more worthless by the hour. He stood up, adjusting his tunic. He adopted the walk he had practiced for weeks. The heavy, dragging gait of a man who has marched too far, seen too much, and has nothing left to give. In 1945 Germany, exhaustion was the best camouflage. Energy was suspicious. Hope was suspicious. He stepped out into the night. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the buildings, making the ruins sound like they were screaming. He kept his head down, navigating the debris-strewn streets by memory. He avoided the main intersections where the Feldgendarmerie, the chained dogs, were hanging deserters from lampposts. He stuck to the shadows, moving toward the administrative district. As he approached the perimeter of the SS complex, the atmosphere changed. The chaos of the city gave way to a tense, rigid order. Sandbag emplacements blocked the road, manned by soldiers of the SS Charlemagne Division, French volunteers who had tied their fate to Hitler's and had nowhere left to run. They were dangerous. They were true believers. Galloway approached the first checkpoint. A spotlight snapped on, its beam blindingly bright, cutting through the swirling dust. Halt! Papers! The sentry's voice was harsh, amplified by the silence of the street. An MP-40 submachine gun was leveled at Galloway's chest. Galloway didn't flinch. He didn't rush. He raised a hand to shield his eyes, squinting into the light. He slowly produced his soulbuch, the paybook that was a German soldier's soul. He held it out, his hand steady. Make it quick, Corporal, Galloway growled, pitching his voice to a flawless, arrogant Bavarian dialect. I have a briefing with Obersturmbannführer Kleist in 10 minutes, and I am already late because of this damned rubble. The name drop was a calculated risk. Kleist was a real officer, a piece of intel provided by a captured secretary just 2 days ago. The sentry hesitated. He stepped closer, the muzzle of his gun lowering slightly. He snatched the book, shining his flashlight onto the pages. Galloway held his breath, forcing his heart rate to remain slow. The forgery was a masterpiece, created by the OSS art department in London. The ink stamps were aged with tea. The paper was rubbed with ash to simulate trench wear. But in the end, it wasn't the paper that mattered, it was the attitude. The sentry looked at the photo, then at Galloway's face. He saw the scar on the cheek, the dirt in the pores, the dead look in the eyes. He saw a superior officer. "Apologies, Hauptmann," the sentry muttered, handing the book back. He snapped a salute. "Pass." Galloway returned the salute lazily, tucked the book away, and walked through the barrier. He felt the eyes of the machine gun crew on his back. Every step was a gamble. One suspicious glance, one phone call to verify his identity, and he would be dead in seconds. The headquarters building loomed ahead, a massive, neoclassical structure. The upper floors had been gutted by fire bombs weeks ago, staring out like empty eye sockets. But the ground floor was a fortress of reinforced concrete. Galloway walked up the steps, stepping over a pile of charred files that someone had dropped in a panic. He entered the main lobby. It was a scene of controlled madness. Officers were running, with armfuls of papers. In the center of the marble floor, metal drums had been set up, and clerks were frantically burning documents. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning secrets. It was the funeral pyre of the Third Reich. Galloway moved with purpose. He knew the layout. The blueprints had been smuggled out by a Polish cleaner a month ago. He navigated through the smoke, heading for the heavy iron door that led to the sub-basements. A guard stood there, an SS giant with a scar running from his ear to his chin. He blocked Galloway's path. "Restricted area, Hauptmann. Special clearance only." Galloway locked eyes with him. He projected pure, unadulterated frustration. "I am the courier for the 11th Panzer. I am carrying the updated defensive coordinates for the Isar River line. Do you want the Americans to cross the bridge by dawn because you wouldn't let me deliver the map?" He tapped the leather satchel at his side. "Or do you want to explain to the general why his flank collapsed?" The guard blinked. The fear of failure, the fear of being the cause of a catastrophe, was a powerful weapon. The German command structure was crumbling. Orders were conflicting. The guard stepped aside, unlocking the heavy door. "Go ahead," he grunted. Galloway stepped through and closed the heavy steel door behind him. The noise of the lobby, the shouting, the burning, was instantly cut off. Silence rushed in. He was in the belly of the beast. The air here was recycled, cool, and smelled of ozone, damp concrete, and fear. The corridor was lit by dim, yellow bulbs and wire cages. He walked softly, his boots making no sound on the linoleum floor. He counted the doors. Room 102, Room 103, Room 104. The archives. The door was locked. Galloway looked left, then right. The corridor was empty for the moment. He didn't use lockpicks. They were too slow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass vial containing a concentrated acid compound. He carefully tipped a single drop into the keyhole. He waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. A faint hiss. A wisp of white smoke. He inserted a tension wrench and turned. The mechanism gave way with a soft, wet crunch. Galloway slipped inside and closed the door, locking it from the inside and wedging a heavy wooden chair under the handle. He was safe for now. The room was vast, lined floor to ceiling, with metal filing cabinets. In the center sat a heavy oak desk, piled high with dossiers stamped Geheim, Secret, and Werewolf. This was it. The gold mine. Galloway moved to the desk. He sat down, his hands moving with the precision of a surgeon. He pulled off his right boot, twisted the heel, and removed the false bottom. Inside lay a Minox subminiature camera, a marvel of spycraft smaller than a cigar lighter. He pulled the tiny beaded chain to measure the exact focal distance, 8 inches. He opened the first file. It was a list of safe houses in Bavaria. Click. Wind. He turned the page. A list of buried explosives caches near the Austrian border. Click. Wind. A list of names. Sleeper agents. School teachers, police officers, doctors, people instructed to wait for the occupation and then strike. Click. Wind. He worked in a trance. The only sound was the tiny mechanical click of the shutter and his own breathing. He was capturing the ghosts of the next war. He was halfway through the third dossier when the world shifted. It started as a vibration in the floorboards, a subtle trembling that rattled the filing cabinets. Then came the sound, a low, distant rumble that grew louder with every second. The sirens began, not the wavering alert, but the rapid, frantic, acute warning. The bombers were directly overhead. The lights flickered and died. Galloway was plunged into absolute darkness. He didn't panic. He reached to his belt and unclipped a flashlight with a red lens. The red beam cut through the gloom, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The building groaned. Dust rained down from the ceiling. A bomb struck somewhere near, the shock wave hitting Galloway in the chest, even this deep underground. He kept working. Click. Wind. He had to get it all. Suddenly, the door handle rattled violently. Is someone in there? Open up. A voice shouted from the corridor. Galloway froze. He shoved the camera into his pocket. He swept the remaining dossiers off the desk and stuffed them inside his tunic. He grabbed the Welrod pistol from his sleeve. Open it. We know you're in there. A burst of machine gun fire shredded the lock. The door was kicked open, sending the wedged chair skidding across the floor. 2 SS soldiers burst in, their flashlights sweeping the room like lightsabers. Clear left. Clear right. They missed him. They were looking for a terrified clerk hiding under a desk. They weren't looking for a shadow standing behind the door. Galloway stepped out. He didn't hesitate. He raised the Welrod. The weapon was ungainly, a tube of machined steel wrapped in rubber, but it was effective. Uft. The sound was no louder than a book closing. The first soldier dropped instantly, a 9mm round through the side of his helmet. Galloway racked the bolt. Clack, clack. It was a manual action, slow and deliberate. The second soldier spun around, his eyes widening as he saw the figure in the red gloom. He began to raise his MP40. Uft. The second shot took him in the throat. He gurgled, collapsing backward, his finger tightening on the trigger as he fell. A spray of bullets stitched across the ceiling, bringing down chunks of plaster and concrete. The noise of the MP40 was deafening in the confined space. It would attract every guard on the floor. Galloway didn't wait to check the bodies. He grabbed a fresh magazine for the dead man's MP40 from his belt. He might need the noise now. Silence was a luxury he had just spent. He ran back into the corridor. The bombing raid was reaching its crescendo. The walls were shaking violently. This was his cover. The chaos upstairs would be absolute. He couldn't go back to the stairs. That would be a choke point, a kill zone. He had a different exit strategy. He sprinted down the hallway toward the utility maintenance room. He kicked the door open. Inside, massive steam pipes ran along the walls, hissing and leaking. He found a ventilation grate near the floor. He knelt, using his knife to unscrew the bolts. His fingers were slippery with sweat and dust. 1 bolt. 2. The third was rusted shut. He cursed, slamming the pommel of his knife against it. It snapped. He pulled the grate away and squeezed his body into the narrow, dark tunnel. It was a tight fit. The duct was lined with grime and smelled of dead rats. He crawled on his elbows and knees, the jagged metal tearing at his uniform. It was claustrophobic hell. The heat from the steam pipes was suffocating. Above him, a blockbuster bomb struck the main building. Boom. The shock wave slammed Galloway against the metal wall of the duct. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine. Dust filled his lungs, choking him. He coughed, spitting out grit, his eyes streaming. For a second, he thought the tunnel had collapsed. He was buried alive in the heart of Nazi Germany. Move, he whispered to himself. Just move. He crawled. Yards felt like miles. His knees were bleeding. Finally, the air changed. The smell of dead rats was replaced by something else. The smell of cold, running water and sewage. The river outflow. He reached the end of the shaft. A rusted iron grate barred his way. Beyond it, he could hear the rushing water of the Isar River. He kicked the grate. It held. He kicked again, screaming with the effort, channeling all his fear and rage into his legs. The grate gave way, splashing into the dark water below. Galloway slid out of the tunnel, falling 10 feet into the blackness. He hit the water. It wasn't just cold, it was liquid ice. The shock paralyzed him for a second, sucking the air from his lungs. It felt like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. He surfaced, gasping, but the current was strong. It grabbed him, dragging him downstream, spinning him around in the darkness. Debris from the city was floating in the river, timbers, crates, bodies. A wooden beam struck his shoulder, nearly knocking him unconscious. He fought the pain. He fought the river. He had to keep the dossiers dry. The oilskin wrapper inside his tunic was the only thing standing between the world and a new reign of terror. He swam toward the western bank, fighting the heavy, waterlogged wool of his uniform. Every stroke was agony. His limbs felt heavy as lead. Hypothermia was setting in. Above him, Munich was burning. The sky was a tapestry of horrors, searchlights sweeping the clouds, flak explosions blossoming like black flowers, and the orange glow of the burning city reflecting off the black water of the river. It was a vision of the apocalypse. Galloway dragged himself onto the muddy bank, miles downstream from the city center. He collapsed into the mud, shivering violently. His teeth chattered, so hard he thought they would crack. He lay there for a minute, unable to move. He checked his chest. The packet was still there. He checked his pocket. The camera was safe in its waterproof casing. He forced himself to stand. He stripped off the sodden Wehrmacht tunic and threw it into the river. He watched it sink. Hauptmann Rice was dead. Beneath the uniform, he wore rough civilian clothes. Now, he was just another refugee in the night. He had a rendezvous point at a bar near Freising, 15 miles to the north. A contact from the White Rose remnant network had a truck fueled and ready. Galloway began to walk. His body screamed for rest. His feet were numb, but his mind was sharp. He touched the pocket containing the film. The names on those lists, they would never wake up to start their new war. They would be hunted down, one by one, before the dust of the old war had even settled. This is the nature of the Shadow War. It is not fought with flags or speeches. It is fought in the dark, in the mud, in the claustrophobic tunnels beneath the earth. It is fought by men who are willing to become ghosts to defeat monsters. Jack Galloway disappeared into the tree lane, leaving the burning city behind him. The history books would record the bombing of Munich. They would record the advance of the armies. But they would never record the man who swam through a freezing river to ensure that the nightmare didn't survive the dawn. If you want to hear more unclassified stories about the spies, saboteurs, and special operators who fought the secret battles of World War II, make sure to subscribe to WW2 Shadow Operations. We are digging deep into the archives to bring you the truth. Dismissed.